No, you didn't.
That's controversial.
It's controversial of kids.
Really good.
Okay,
It's been a good one.
Bye, guys.
Mwah, 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 mwah. Oh my! Delete everything. Delete everything.
The case against David Anthony Burke continues to produce details that are disturbing, not just for what they suggest about the formal charges, but for what they reveal about how David moved through public life during the months surrounding the alleged events. The bloody shirt merchandise, the fan workshops at the Hollywood Hills property, the funeral-themed tour, the specific dates on which he posted about his music, his album, and his tour releases, while prosecutors allege Celeste Rivas Hernandez's remains were inside the front trunk of his Tesla, the social media gaps that align with alleged Santa Barbara trips. Each detail taken alone requires careful framing. Taken together, they form a documented public record of behavior across one of the most significant periods in the prosecution's formal timeline. A period that prosecutors argue is not characterized by panic, disruption, or signs of a person in crisis, but by the continued deliberate operation of a public persona that gave no visible indication of what investigators were later assembling from the forensic and digital evidence left behind. David Anthony Burke has pleaded not guilty to all charges. He is presumed innocent unless and until the evidence establishes otherwise through the formal legal process. Everything discussed here is drawn from publicly available information, court testimony, and the documented public record of his social media activity and commercial releases. The merchandise came up during the preliminary hearing in a specific and documented evidentiary context. Investigators testified that when they searched the Hollywood Hills garage, they found jugs of a red substance that tested negative for biological blood, confirming it was fake blood consistent with the kind used for commercial merchandise. The defense argued that the presence of fake blood in the garage was connected to David's creative and commercial work, not to any alleged crime. That argument was relevant because the same garage also contained items that did test positive for Celeste's DNA and showed presumptive positive reactions for real blood through Blue Star luminescent testing. Investigators tested the merchandise and the materials associated with it and confirmed there was no biological blood in those specific items. What the merchandise does establish independently of the forensic questions is a documented pattern.
To make my bloody shirt uniform for a tour. Excuse me. Go ahead and take your hand, put some blood on that hand, take that hand, and put it on that shirt. And I'm gonna do this 25 more times, and I'll come back to you when it's finished. That's the bloody shirt. As you see, my hands are completely decimated, but we came out with a good uniform. I'm gonna go on stage.
David had been producing and selling blood-splattered white button-down shirts, what he marketed as part of his artistic identity, from the same Hollywood Hills property where investigators later found what they describe as forensic evidence connecting Celeste's case to that location. Whether a jury will find that proximity meaningful in any legal sense is a question the trial will address. The merchandise itself is not evidence of homicide, but the documented context in which it was produced and sold is part of the public record. The forensic question about contamination, whether fake blood could theoretically obscure or interfere with testing for real biological blood in the same space, is one that forensic chemistry can address directly. The luminescent chemical reagents used in the garage search, including Blue Star, are designed to identify hemoglobin at trace levels. They are not defeated by the presence of non-biological red pigments, or theatrical fake blood, which is typically made from food-grade dyes, corn syrup, or similar materials, rather than any compound that produces the hemoglobin reaction these tests target. The investigators' testing methodology specifically addresses this distinction. The confirmed positive results from the garage and the confirmed DNA match to Celeste came from biological material, not from the theatrical merchandise materials. Those two categories of substance produce different results under forensic chemical testing, and the investigation's findings reflect that distinction. One detail from the merchandise timeline carries specific evidentiary significance. On April 22, 2025, one day before the date prosecutors allege Celeste Rivas Hernandez was unalived, David sent a message to his fan base announcing that the bloody shirts were back and encouraging people to purchase them for his upcoming tour. That specific date places an active commercial promotion of blood-splattered merchandise in direct proximity to the date the prosecution identifies as the most critical in their formal timeline. That is not evidence of anything on its own. It is a documented fact about what David was doing publicly on April 22, 2025, and that proximity is part of the documented record. The defense has argued that the fake blood merchandise and the theatrical dark imagery throughout David's creative work reflect an artistic persona, specifically the Atami character and the visual world built around his music, and that conflating that artistic identity with the forensic evidence is a misapplication of the evidence. Courts have consistently recognized that artistic expression, however dark or disturbing in retrospect, does not constitute evidence of criminal conduct. That principle applies here. The merchandise is not a confession. It is a commercial product and a creative choice that now exists in an extremely uncomfortable proximity to the alleged events. Investigators did examine the merchandise for any trace of biological material during the garage search. Based on testimony, the fake blood used in the merchandise did not contaminate the real biological samples collected from the garage in a way that prevented those samples from being tested and matched to Celeste. The forensic technology used, luminescent chemical reagents and DNA testing, is designed to identify biological blood in trace amounts even in the presence of other substances. The confirmed DNA match from the garage to Celeste Rivas Hernandez remains one of the strongest forensic connections in the prosecution's formal case, separate from and uncontaminated by the fake blood merchandise materials. David also organized what he described as fan workshops at the Hollywood Hills property, where dedicated fans would attend and create their own blood-splattered shirts. Those workshops are documented in his social media history and represent a specific period of fan interaction at the same location that is now central to the prosecution's formal case.
My phone got stolen. This is the anti-theft lock screen. Yeah, I checked my location on my other phone this morning. It's in China right now getting dismembered, so tragic.
The workshops brought people, fans who had no knowledge of what investigators now allege was happening in that space, into the physical environment that is at the center of the prosecution's forensic evidence. Whether any workshop attendees observed anything relevant to the investigation is a question investigators may have explored as part of the broader evidence collection that prosecutors describe as spanning more than 40 terabytes. The detail that generates the most analytical interest across the merchandise timeline is the April 22nd promotion. April 22nd was also the date of the final major argument between David and Celeste Rivas Hernandez that is documented in the private messages prosecutors introduced during the preliminary hearing. That argument, in which Celeste threatened to expose the relationship to contact her father and to end David's career, is what the prosecution identifies as the proximate trigger for what they allege happened the following evening. On the same day that argument was happening in private, David was publicly promoting blood-splattered shirts to his fan base for the upcoming tour. Whether that timing means anything legally depends on what the prosecution can prove about intent and planning. It is part of the documented record. It is not established as evidence of specific criminal intent. But the juxtaposition, a private crisis about exposure, and a public commercial promotion of blood imagery on the same day is part of the specific factual picture that prosecutors will present to a jury. The tour itself presents another layer of the documented public record that requires careful treatment. David's debut album, Withered, the name itself a reference to something slowly dying, launched alongside a tour that featured a distinctly funeral aesthetic. The tour included a coffin as a stage prop, flower arrangements consistent with funeral imagery, and what some observers described as a memorial table where fans could leave notes similar to the kind of memory book seen at actual funeral services. The coffin was a theatrical element, not an actual container holding any remains. Celeste Rivas Hernandez's remains were in the front trunk of David's Tesla during the period the tour was operating, not in any stage prop. The funeral aesthetic of the Withered tour was not a post-arrest development. It was a planned and publicly promoted creative choice that was visible to thousands of fans who attended his performances, many of whom had no knowledge of the circumstances the investigation would later reveal. Whether it reflected genuine artistic vision connected to the dark themes David had built his creative identity around since Romantic Homicide, a subconscious or deliberate response to the actual circumstances he was privately navigating, or simply the kind of theatrical performance choices that generate attention and discussion, is not something the available evidence can establish definitively. What is established is that David toured with a coffin as a prop, with white roses and funeral flower arrangements, with what fans described as a memorial atmosphere. During the months when prosecutors allege Celeste Rivas Hernandez's remains were inside his vehicle.
Oh, y'all don't understand, JB. Like, bro, listen.
I don't think that song was my vibe.
Listen. When Justin Bieber followed me, bro, I pissed myself. I pissed my pants. I'm so serious. You guys don't like JB like I like JB, bro. I'm telling you, bro.
Okay.
The tour brought those specific theatrical choices into the documented public record during precisely the period the prosecution describes as the sustained concealment phase. Many of David's fans at the time interpreted the funeral theme as a creative metaphor for rebirth through art. None of them knew what prosecutors would later allege about the specific circumstances from which the tour launched. The album name Withered is itself part of the documented public record. The word describes a living thing slowly dying, a branch or limb losing vitality from within. Whether the album name was chosen before or after the events of April 23, 2025 is not established by the available public information. What is established is that the album carrying that title, combined with a tour centered on funeral imagery, was publicly launched and commercially promoted in the weeks immediately following the date prosecutors identify as the central event of their case.
Like, no, show me proof. And no, like, I can't, like, explain to you guys what he showed me.
On September 7th, 2025, Celeste Rivas Hernandez's birthday, David announced the deluxe version of Withered. The following day, September 8th, 2025, her remains were discovered inside the front trunk of his Tesla at a Hollywood tow yard. That specific 2-day sequence, a birthday announcement followed by the discovery of remains, exists in the documented public record as a juxtaposition that is difficult to read as coincidental without information that the available evidence does not yet provide. Whether a jury will view it as meaningful within the full body of evidence is a question the trial will address. During a tour performance around the same period, David was photographed wearing a shirt displaying the number 97, a detail some observers have connected to Celeste's September 7th birthday, written numerically as 9/7. Whether that specific shirt was chosen for that reason, whether it reflected a different creative or personal meaning, or whether the connection is coincidental, has not been established through any formal evidentiary process. It is an observed detail from the public record of the tour, one of many that the intersection of documented facts and unanswerable questions has placed in front of anyone following this case closely. The tour also produced documented public interactions that drew attention. Asia Collins, who had been part of David's professional circle and who is a named individual in the prosecution's broader narrative, publicly stated that she was on tour with David and that, learning the full scope of the allegations, that someone she had known as a genuinely caring person could have been involved in a crime of this severity and in a relationship with a minor of this age was among the most disturbing experiences of her life. Her account of removing herself from the tour once the information became public and of cooperating fully with investigators forms part of the documented public record around this period.
So I checked out his burner account and there's this video of him cleaning shoes, and there were like Hello Kitty shoes that he was cleaning also, but he's cleaning these pair of shoes right here. This is Celeste's profile picture on Facebook, and she's wearing the exact same pair of shoes that are in that video.
The broader social media timeline across the period from April through September 2025 is one of the most thoroughly documented dimensions of the public record in this case. On April 24, 2025, one day after the date prosecutors alleged Celeste was unalived, David was active on social media celebrating the release of Withered and interacting with fans. From April 25th through the 30th, he continued posting regularly about the album and engaging with his fan base on an almost daily basis. His public output during that period showed no visible disruption from the events prosecutors allege were occurring privately during those exact days. That absence of visible disruption is analytically significant. People following public events surrounding this case have observed correctly that the apparent normalcy of David's social media activity during this period is consistent with what prosecutors describe as a deliberate and sustained concealment effort. The purchases under false aliases, the trips to Santa Barbara, the continued management of his professional public image, all operating simultaneously without visible intersection. Whether the jury will view that apparent normalcy as evidence of deliberate concealment or simply as the behavior of someone who prosecutors have not yet proven was involved in any crime is a question the trial will resolve. Then, around May 8th, there is a documented gap. Despite having been highly active on social media, David's accounts went inactive for 2 consecutive days. According to prosecutors, he returned to the Santa Barbara area during approximately that same period. The same general area where Celeste's passport identification card was later discovered in January 2026 near State Route 154, reportedly found by a Caltrans worker in the bushes along the highway. The discovery of that identification card in a remote Santa Barbara County location months after April 23, 2025 is one of the documented facts connecting the Santa Barbara visits to the formal case. On May 10th, David began posting again. On May 12th, he was celebrating Withered's continued success and discussing new music. On May 31, 2025, prosecutors allege he returned to the Santa Barbara area again. That evening, he posted on social media about listening to 11 p.m. on repeat and describing it as potentially his best song. The song contains the lyric, "Open the door, let me in," language that maps uncomfortably directly to the final documented message Celeste sent on the night of April 23, 2025, which read, "I'm almost there. Open your doors if you're home." Whether the song was written before or after April 23rd, whether the lyrical overlap is coincidental or something else, is not established by the available evidence. The parallel exists in the documented public record and will exist in front of a jury. Then on July 29, 2025, the date investigators identified as the last documented day the Tesla was driven before it was towed, David posted on social media about looking forward to a music release in early August. According to testimony from Detective Joshua Byers, vehicle telemetry data shows David's iPhone disconnecting from the Tesla at 2:18 p.m. on July 29th. Neighborhood surveillance footage captured the Tesla leaving his rental home shortly afterward. 2 minutes later, a neighbor's security camera recorded David walking back toward the property on foot. His public post that day made no reference to any of that. The juxtaposition between what the vehicle telemetry documented and what David's social media posts communicated on the same day is among the more striking in the documented timeline. The specific dates, April 22nd bloody shirt promotion, April 23rd alleged homicide, April 24th album celebration, the Santa Barbara area visits in May, July 29th, Tesla abandonment paired with a music promotion post, September 7th, Celeste's birthday paired with a deluxe album announcement, September 8th, remains discovered, form a documented timeline in which David's public persona continued operating without visible disruption across the entire period prosecutors say the concealment was being carried out. That documented pattern does not prove guilt. It does not establish specific criminal intent on any particular date. What it establishes is a specific and documented picture of how David Anthony Burke managed his public presence during a period that is now at the center of a first-degree homicide case. A defense team arguing that their client had nothing to do with Celeste's tragedy will need to account for that specific documented timeline, not just individual details in isolation, but the full sequence of dated public actions alongside the dated private events the prosecution has assembled from the forensic and digital evidence record. One additional documented detail, investigators noted that David made a public social media statement describing a stolen or damaged phone in language that included the word dismembered. In the context of formal charges that include the unlawful mutilation of human remains, the specific word choice attracted attention, whether it reflects unconscious expression, deliberate reference, dark humor, or pure coincidence, is not something the documented public record can establish. It is a noted detail, one that, like so many elements of this case, sits at the intersection of documented fact and unanswerable question. The broader picture these details form is one of a public persona that continued operating with apparent normalcy, music promotion, fan engagement, tour performances, social media posts, across a period that prosecutors allege included the concealment of a teenager's remains in a vehicle, multiple trips to remote areas of Santa Barbara County, and purchases under a false identity that the investigation subsequently traced back to David through a digital paper trail spanning more than 40 terabytes of evidence. The trial will determine what the evidence proves beyond a reasonable doubt. Every confirmed significant development will be covered here as the case moves toward those proceedings. David Anthony Burke has pleaded not guilty to all charges. He is presumed innocent unless and until the evidence establishes otherwise through the formal legal process. Her family has been present for every day of the formal proceedings, waiting for the accountability that only the trial can deliver. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you stay updated. SpillHop. We do not just report the story, we slow it all the way down, go deeper than the headlines, and make sure you actually walk away understanding what is really happening and why it matters.